Hello and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. My name is Tony Bitzionis, and I'm here with my lovely co-host, my lovely friend, Mr. Alex Perala. Alex, hello.
You're too kind, Tony. Thank you.
I
Hello.
know, I know. We can change that in post. I'll edit out the lovely part.
Don't
Like the lovely, lovely,
Keep it.
keep it.
my my dynamic.
Speaking of lovely, we're here with our lovely friend, frequent collaborator, and founder and CEO of the Prism Project, Acuity Market Intelligence, and the Deepfake Summit. That's Maxine Most. Max, welcome
I
back to
just
the
keep,
show.
thanks. I just keep adding brands to my list.
Just keep adding brands to your umbrella. Max, welcome back to the show. I mean, I think most of our listeners know who you are, but why don't you just go ahead and tell us a little bit about your journey and what's going on right now, and then we'll get into it.
So I've spent the last 25 years in the biometrics and digital identity space, which now seems, just saying it seems pretty monumental, particularly given the acceleration of the marketplace for these technologies over the past few years. And I started out with my business Acuity Market Intelligence, which is a strategic consultancy and research firm, is sort of my umbrella firm that has been looking at these technologies and how they've evolved and what it takes to actually build emerging markets around them for 25 years now. Uh, Back in 2023, launched something called the Prism Project, which is really an offshoot of my work in this whole area that is focused on what I call market education at scale. I have 40 plus years now in emerging tech, and one of the critical components of building technology markets is understanding how you bridge the gap between the people who are developing this technology and the people who have to apply and use this technology. And so the Prism project is really designed to help practitioners in public and private sector who have to deploy this technology to solve problems, to really understand it enough to engage in meaningful conversation with the vendors who are providing the tech and understand how it's going to work in their ecosystems. And then this year in 2026, launched the Deepfake Summit, another outgrowth really of the work I've done over the past 25 years, and started out kind of hyper focused on deepfakes, but that's sort of expanded as the technology has grown around fraud attack vectors. So really looking at deepfakes and synthetic identity and agentic AI and injection attacks and all of that good stuff, and really what it means to build trust infrastructure in a world that is driven by these AI fueled fraud and impersonation threats.
Yeah. And that was the very first Deepfake Summit event was in Houston earlier this year, right?
Yeah, it was in
Um,
March. It was in March. It was kind of our pilot to see whether or not the event would work. And the reason why I refer to it as a pilot and really talk about it as, is this an event or a summit that can work is because it's really different than most events that are out in the world. I guess I really feel like I never need to go to another event and sit through a PowerPoint presentation. I never need to go to another event and have a one-way not a conversation, a one-way, broadcast of
Mhm.
of an expert or multiple experts on a panel getting up and just talking. I really feel that we need to take this event concept into another realm, which is really about conversation and
mhm.
about collaboration. And so the idea behind the summit is getting 100, 150 really smart people in the room who understand these threats, who look at them from very different perspectives, whether it's technology, policy, privacy, you know, risk, fraud across financial services, government, transportation, healthcare, utilities, and create a really dynamic environment where these experts can actually discuss, debate, and collaborate about how we are going to build a trust ecosystem in this world. And so, we did a couple of things. We broke down the separation between the audience and the panelists. I created panels of people that were not all from one sector or silo, but represented different perspectives. And it was a very interesting, dynamic day with a lot of really powerful conversation that was driven as much by the audience as it was by the panelists.
Yeah, I really like that approach. That's kind of the feedback that we were hearing. We chatted with some people. We were at Identity Week a couple months after your event, and we were hearing like, yeah, it had this very collaborative feel to it. And I feel like cross-domain discussion is how progress happens. Like it's not going to happen with like everyone who works on one problem talking to each other. So I think that's a great approach. Am I right that it was like Chatham House rules? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Chatham House rule. Actually, I always
Okay.
want to say rules as well, but apparently it's
The
singular.
rule.
And the idea
Like Cider
is,
House rules. Yeah.
yeah, that you everyone can speak freely, that
Mhm.
nothing is going to be attributed to an individual. But I did do an audio recording of the event, creating a transcript, and use that transcript to create a post-event intelligence report, which is also really important to me because people go to these events, they have these conversations, and then that's it. And what
Mhm.
I'm trying to do is to create more of a collaborative community that's evolving over time. So the summit that's coming up just in 2 weeks now, September 1st, in Arlington, Virginia, starts where the Houston event ended. So
Mhm.
we had the event intelligence report. We're taking those themes and findings and insights out of that event, combining that with what's happening over the past 6 months in the industry, and that's the starting point for the agenda uh, for the September 1st event. And again, another kind of differentiation is it's a highly curated agenda. It builds on itself. It's a conversation that's happening over a day with all the people in the same room that builds on itself um, in a way that connects this as one large conversation, as
Mhm.
opposed to what we see now at most conferences, which is, they've got 5 tracks, it's spaghetti against the wall. You can have 3 or 4 panels or conversations that are covering the same topic, and there's not a sense of connection and coherence. And so I'm really trying to create that kind of an experience in the room. And again, we got really good feedback in Houston. So now, we're taking that half day and now we're turning it into a full day.
Yeah,
That's
and you got
awesome.
some big names lined up, I think, from what I've been seeing, which is great to see and also kind of wild to me because Acuity traditionally is not an events organization, and suddenly you're like knocking it out of the park.
Well, yeah, it was, it's really important to me to have, I think, a lot of unique perspectives in the room, and you need some of the brand names and sort of, people who have come from broader, more recognized experience, as well as a lot of, upstarts and innovators and individual contributors and smaller businesses that are, focused on specific areas of expertise. So, for example, our keynote is being given by a woman named Jennifer Eubank, who is the former deputy director of CIA for digital innovation. So she's going to start the day giving us a really kind of global perspective based on her, 30 plus years at the CIA of what the threat landscape looks like out in the world and how it's evolving and how these technologies are combining with, criminal enterprises, non-state actors, and even terrorism, and what that's the kind of soup that's creating in the world that we live in, which is really dangerous and unprecedented in a lot of ways because um, the power of these tools are making this kind of activity accessible to anybody.
Yeah.
Um, so it's going to be great to have someone like that frame the day. And then we have folks from Coinbase. We have the former chief privacy officer of the U.S. Senate. We've got leading representatives from like DHS and HHS. We have a strategist from San Mateo County Emergency Management out in California. We have someone who's focused on fraud intelligence at Upwork. We have folks from Accenture, and along with some great vendors in the industry that people are familiar with, like FaceTech and SoCure. Kind of newer players that are entering into the fray, like Hopay and Yeah, so it's going to be a really interesting combination of people that have, a real broad spectrum of experience, and again, are looking at this problem in very different ways. And so what that creates in the panels in particular is this dynamic where, you know, you have folks that are actually maybe disagreeing with each other, looking at things differently, challenging each other's ideas and perspective. And then you throw the audience into this because we have standing mics and floating mics throughout the every session. So anybody can stand up at any point and make a comment, challenge an idea, make a suggestion for how we can think about things. And so it's a very different sort of experience than I think people are used to, sort of sitting in dark rooms and being talked to
Hmm.
That's awesome. And
by
yeah,
four
before,
people on a panel that all agree with each other.
yeah, well, and before we hit record, you told us something that we both thought was really cool, which is more than half the speakers are women.
Yeah.
Um, that's, I mean, you
So
made,
I've been, right, I've been in emerging high tech for over 40 years.
yeah,
Um, I don't have gray hair yet, which is awesome, but I do have the years that I put in. And this is, as far as I know, the first and only tech conference, because this is really leading edge technology, AI, deep fakes, synthetic identity, identity verification technologies, all this like leading edge risk assessment,
yeah.
where half the speakers are women. I've never been in 40 plus years in my experience in emerging high tech at a conference where half the speakers were women. And
Mhm.
I'm proud of that fact. It's been an amazing experience for me to just be doing outreach and networking and finding all these incredible women. It's also really interesting because when you look in the areas of risk and compliance and fraud, there tend to be a lot of women
Mhm.
involved. And I think it's for two reasons. One is these are sort of multidimensional problems. And I think my experience is, we can go back and talk about, whether this is politically correct or not. But truth is, I think women tend to be really, effective at multitasking and multiprocessing. We tend to be able to use both the left and right side of our brains and bounce back and forth in a really kind of easy, natural way. I also think women are natural collaborators, and this is an ecosystem problem.
Mhm.
This is it's not just a technology problem or just a policy problem or just a standards problem or just a risk and fraud assessment problem. It is a ecosystem problem that requires an ecosystem approach to problem solving. And one of the things I'm hoping to do with the summit, as I bring all these people together from these different sectors and silos, is to, throughout this day and the conversations, come to some consensus about how and what we need to build, and then have those folks go back to their bubbles of expertise,
Mhm.
right? And take that consensus thinking with them so that we're now having the ability to impact across sectors and silos by coming together um, in a event that crosses all of those different areas, and then people go back to those areas bringing that what they've learned with them. So that, to me, is a way of actually accelerating market development and creating faster not just development of technology but adoption of the technology, because that's really where we're seeing the challenge. We have a environment where the threat vectors and the technology is accelerating at an incredible pace, and then we have public and private sector institutions that cannot consume the updated technology and solutions at the pace that they're being developed. And so we have this disconnect. So we have to build an infrastructure that allows us to bridge that gap. And I don't know what the answer is, but that's going to be one of the questions, big questions at the summit, is how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, on this show, over the last 6 months, we've had so many conversations where like the tone is the industry starting to appreciate and understand the major shifts that are happening because of this new tech. And yes, there are solutions, and yes, there are different approaches to these problems, but an underlying theme is really is like, do we really appreciate how things are changing and how things are about to change even more? And so I feel like the summit now, it's like the perfect time for such a collaborative approach to a discussion like this, to have different people from the industry. And on that note, can you talk a little bit about the agenda and about like what some of these topics that you guys are gonna split off and discuss are gonna be?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, like it's a very intentional agenda that builds on itself. And so I'm gonna start the day by framing the conversation with some of the models that I've built over the years and some new models, including a really cool GIF diagram of these two wheels moving at different speeds, which thank you, Claude, for being able to do that for me because I don't have the skill to do it myself. Anyway, and then so I'm going to try to frame the day in terms of sort of where we are in these models and this concept of resilient trust, which we introduced at the last summit, which is this notion that the tools and technologies to detect, defend against, and mitigate these um, threat vectors and the notions of privacy and compliance that really need to drive the evolution of these technologies are not, in fact, two separate things, but two sides of the same thing. So it's that notion that, these are not, it's not two different problems we're trying to solve. It's one problem we need to solve with this resilient trust approach. And that's kind of what framed our event in Houston. And then we're going to, open again with Jennifer Eubank, who's going to kind of give us a global scope and, basically scare the bejesus out of everybody. And then we're going through and talking about like what are the current obsolete threat models that are kind of driving the market, and how do we deal with those, right? Not just from a technology perspective, but from a communications perspective. What does fraud detection look like throughout an entire identity lifecycle? Not just getting in the front door and doing verification and authentication, but understanding that this is like a dynamic process that has to exist constantly. What's happening with the whole world of agentic AI, and what does it mean now to build trust in a world where we have to think about humans, machines, and AI agents all interacting at different levels, and what does foundational trust mean in that world? What does it mean to build foundational identity? Um,
Mhm.
then we're talking about governance, and again, can we think about governance as a driver of trust and security and actual growth instead of a break or a prohibition on technology evolution? We're going to have an amazing lunchtime innovation showcase where some of the vendors that are sponsoring are going to be demonstrating kind of the technologies that they have. We have Frances Alasny, who I think most people in this industry know. She's been around for 25 years. I think she's one of the most brilliant people in the industry, and she's going to give our
Love Francis.
afternoon keynote on really talking about, how do you really accelerate identity modernization? How do we actually like implement this technology proactively instead of waiting, until it's regulated into existence?
Mhm.
Then we've got, we're talking about real world deployments, we're talking about privacy, data ownership, and then we're going to end the day sort of with a panel that really talks about so what does all this mean in terms of how we build trust infrastructure? So again, it's very thematic, which is really kind of different than a lot of panels and talks at other events where they tend to focus on specific niche areas, and you bring four people up from financial services and talk about how payments and banking are evolving. It's a much more thematic approach to covering this topic and trying to actually figure out how we move forward in a collaborative way to build this ecosystem.
Mhm. That's a great agenda. That kind of covers everything, which
That
is
was
great because it's not just, I mean, it's a great name, the Deepfake Summit. I always like the name, but it's not just about deepfakes.
Right.
And there's like a whole bunch of stuff we need to think about now, whether we're ready or not.
Yeah.
On that
Yeah,
note,
and from all these different perspectives, like I said, I reached out to this woman, we connected, who does emergency management
mm,
for a county government. And I'm like, oh yeah, this stuff is really important. It's driving what we're doing. And I'm like, everybody at every level of public and private sector enterprise is looking at this threat landscape and saying, oh my God, how do I operate effectively in this environment?
mhm. Yeah, and I want to hear you riff a little more because like Tony said, we talk about AI a lot. Everybody's talking their book, so everybody wants to say, well, the real threat is this, which our solution happens to fix. But like Max, you're an analyst. You've been looking at this objectively, and I want your perspective. Like, just do you have a general take on the general state of the threat of deepfakes, the threat of agentic AI? Like, what's your sense of the danger level we're in right now?
So I think what's interesting is, I talk a lot about this because I think there's a lot of AI hype going on right now, right? In
Mhm.
terms of what AI can and can't do. And I'm like, I keep telling people we're decades away from Skynet.
Mhm.
Um, because there are real good uses of AI generally. Like, for example, we were talking about this previously, like medical diagnosis. AI, this is such a good use of
Mm.
AI
Mhm.
because humans just can't collect all the information that's out there, and particularly for really rare conditions. And people suffer for years because they can't find the right physician who can diagnose what they have. So, like, I look at AI in that respect and think, oh my God, that's an incredibly powerful tool and that's great. And then on the other hand, you look at this all of this sort of impersonation fraud and AI driven fraud. And basically what AI has done is industrialized fraud threats. It
Mhm.
means you don't need sophisticated technology to go, apply for 10,000 credit cards in an hour,
Mhm.
Right.
right? This stuff can all be automated. And so I think that threat landscape is it's interesting because I think, we're seeing it in certain areas, particularly in financial services, where there's been a lot of fraud threat. And it's weird because in other countries where the organizations, particularly in financial services, have a lot more accountability for these fraud threats than we do. In the US, companies just tend to write off fraud and just charge it back to the customers in one way or another, but I think we're getting to the point where even in the United States, where they've been able to sort of write the stuff off and kind of charge it back, we're now getting to the point where that's no longer feasible.
Mhm.
And I also think even without regulation that puts the onus on the organizations that are victimized by this technology, I think we're at a point now where people are starting to see this even in their daily lives. People are talking about their grandmothers and like, oh, they're seeing stuff on their own phones, and the whole what was that? The toll message scam that was going out. Like all
Yeah.
of this stuff is being driven by the fact that it's really easy to do, and when I say industrialized, I mean industrialized. There are industrial parks that have sprung up in jungles in Southeast Asia
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
2 years, where there are now thousands of people sitting in essentially office buildings with computer terminals, and it's touching everybody. As I said, even from on the personal level to like HR fraud is huge right now. There are all these people that are fake employees, and there's a lot of scams around that. So I think what's happening now is that the volume and the intensity of these threats are becoming so significant that organizations don't feel like they can ignore it anymore. And they can't just say, well, that's the fraud department, that's a fraud problem. It's like we're just going to write that off. It's becoming more entrenched in how they run their organizations. It's a bigger problem. It's impacting operations. It's being connected to not just monetary loss, but um, intellectual property attacks. So
Mhm.
I think as these threat vectors become more universal and spread across industries and within organizations, they just can't be ignored anymore. And so I think that's really what's happening. We're getting to this tipping point where organizations are saying, oh, we really need to do something about this. And then the question is, okay, well, what do you do? And that to me comes back to this ecosystem problem, because it's not, you can't, this isn't going to just be your fraud department is going to go solve this problem, right?
Right.
This requires cross-functional operational teams within organizations. In fact, I had a conversation with someone 2 weeks ago, and I said, maybe even the way that enterprises structure themselves isn't going to work anymore.
Mhm.
Like this idea that we break down the organization into these different areas of responsibility, like maybe that doesn't even hold in this world
Mhm.
because this stuff is so insidious. Anyway, so I think the practical implications are significant transformation, and I think people are just starting to wake up to that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
We've
I just elaborate. Like it sounds like a lot of the problem you're identifying is basically scale, the scale of it, which I think is key because like months ago we were hearing about some guy at a bank getting on a Zoom call and he thinks he's talking to his boss and does a wire transfer, and that's scary, and that's like a new thing to solve. Like how do we address this specific deepfake threat? But then the other thing is just scaling up your normal everyday attacks like phishing emails or whatever. AI can do that at an incredible scale, and it just reinforces the need to solve the problems that we were already trying to solve, which is like, how do we get people to stop using bad passwords,
Yeah.
set up 2FA, like stuff like that is like just
Right.
more important now.
Are
Well,
either
as
of you familiar
fundamentally,
with?
we're shifting the security model from trying to put boxes around things with locks
Mhm.
on them
Mhm.
to who are you? How do you
Mhm.
prove who you are? What do you have access to? And can you, provide cryptographically secure verification that all of those things are true?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's a
Are
different
either of
world.
you familiar with the "Is This AI" subreddit? Um, because there's a subreddit that's "Is This AI," and it's predominantly people posting an image that says, I need help figuring out if this is AI. This man has been contacting my aunt and
Mhm.
she wants to send him money. Sometimes there's funny ones like my grandmother's mad at her friend because she sent her this picture and it's a picture of an older woman in a kitchen with Martha Stewart. Like it's clearly AI because they're like holding a piping hot pan with their bare hands and it's but a lot of them it's just like it's like just scams, just classic scams. But
Right.
now you have them targeting you know a single person in their 60s living in some small town, and I feel like if that's not kind of a demonstration of how prevalent and cheap this technology is, then like
Well, it's
we've been
interesting that you say that, Tony, because at the top of the agenda, there's a question on the website. It says, "How do we preserve trust when authenticity itself can no longer be taken for granted?" And
Mhm.
exactly.
it's authenticity of everything. It's documents, it's credentials, it's utility bills, it's pictures of your grandma. It's
Mhm.
everything. We live in a world where we cannot trust what we see with our own eyes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And
yeah,
how do we operate? Like I believe personally that if we don't figure out how to solve for this, it leads to societal breakdown.
Mhm.
yeah.
You
I've
can't
already had
interact. How do you trust anybody? How do you do
a
business with
number of
anybody?
yeah. My like sisters or cousins will send each other, I don't know, TikToks or Instagram reels. And there's been a number of times where I've had to be like, unfortunately, this is it. And to the point where they're like, oh, you're such like you just ruined that.
Buzzkill.
Yeah,
Well,
totally.
yeah, but like,
But well,
Just
but
it's
no,
enjoy the
funny too.
fun.
On Facebook, there are
yeah,
all these like things they were going around. I haven't seen as many now, but it's like animals and babies, like
yeah,
bears, all this stuff. Where, oh, my toddler went outside and there was a bear
yeah,
and the cat chased the bear
yeah.
away. And I'm like, oh my
There's a
God,
baby
okay.
bear on the back of a eagle or something like that. And you're like, okay, well, come on now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the lions came and my dog, like repelled them.
Just
Okay.
a good little rule of thumb that'll probably be outdated by the time this airs is if you notice a clip is exactly 10 seconds long, I find that's
Right.
often a red flag. But that'll
Anyway,
change.
so this is like I think again, going back to my earlier point, like everybody is starting to see this stuff all over their daily lives,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It's coming at us in every direction, and so people are like, okay, like this is a serious problem, and tons of different people are attacking components of that problem, and I
Mhm.
am trying to get as many of those people who are looking at it from different perspectives in one room for one day at the same time to kind of bang heads and figure out how we can proceed in meaningful ways and make progress that is going to be helpful for society in general. And and that benefits the technology folks, it benefits the enterprises, it benefits government, it benefits everybody if we can get kind of a consensus around what we need to do and kind of move forward together.
Yeah, here, here. I know we're running out of time, but just quickly, I want to pivot to your Acuity, your Prism reports, because you had a financial services one that came out just recently.
Yep.
And did you see like was it obvious how AI was impacting things based like from that report, or do you have
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely, that's threaded throughout the report. And one of the things we did, we introduced some new models in that report. We'll be talking about a little bit about that at the summit. But yeah, I mean, you can go to the Prism Project website. The reports are free to download. They are targeted for people who are not experts. Every term we use, we define, It is designed for generally, intelligent human beings that are not experts in identity or AI or any of these, technologies, decentralized identity, all the wallets, all this stuff you're hearing about. We basically break it all down, define it all, and help provide a view on how this is impacting, in this case, the evolution of the financial services marketplace. So it's designed for everybody. You don't need to be an expert to use it. And we evaluate hundreds of companies that are operating across the ecosystem. So it's a great resource for folks that are trying to understand how these technologies are impacting their business, what they need to be doing in the financial services sphere to get ahead of some of these threats that are rapidly evolving.
Mm.
Awesome. And before we let you go, Max, I just want to make sure we'll include all these links in the episode description, but want to get it on record. Go to the deepfakesummit.com. You can, right there at the top, you've got access to the Houston Summit info that people can download, and all the information is right there. But it is September 1st in Washington, D.C.
It's actually in Arlington. It's actually in Arlington, Virginia, right around the corner from the Roslyn Metro stop. Super easy to get to.
Yep.
Lots of parking. It's a great location, and we're breakfast, lunch, and a cocktail reception, snacks all day. I'm a big person on snacks and coffee, so they have these nosh stations. So, plenty of fuel for people. Really interesting conversation. A great dynamic group. So yes, please join us. And if you work for the state, local, or federal government, you can get a complimentary pass. You can reach out to me to get one of those. We'd love to have you join us.
Amazing. And
Yeah,
we'll have
I'll
all
just
that.
add also, like, look at who's attending, because these are people who are serious about figuring this stuff out. This isn't one of those events where people just go to sell stuff. This is like they really want to have a conversation. So pay attention is my advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go to the front page of the website and scroll down at the bottom, you'll see a ton of logos of organizations that are involved, sponsoring, attending, partnering, and we'd love to have you there too.
Amazing.
All right. Well, thanks, Max. It's always so much fun chatting with you, and I wish you luck. I don't think Tony and I could manage an event between us, so good luck. I'm sure it's going to be amazing, just like the Houston one was.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Max.